something unbelievable is happening behind the closed doors of one of the most high-profile legal battles in Hollywood. It's not just about actors and lawsuits anymore. This has now spiraled into something deeper, more disturbing, and far more personal. For many observers, this case between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni seemed like just another celebrity feud playing out in headlines and press releases. But what we're now uncovering is far more unsettling. Behind the public facade of legal strategy and courtroom decorum, a completely different narrative is unraveling, one where truth becomes a liability, creators are being silenced, and those who ask the wrong questions are targeted with force. In a shocking development, serious concerns are being raised about the conduct of Blake Lively's legal team, and not just in terms of their defense tactics. It's about a pattern of deflection, misrepresentation, and aggressive legal maneuvers allegedly aimed at silencing voices outside the courtroom. Specifically, content creators, journalists, and independent commentators are increasingly being pulled into this storm, with subpoenas, veiled threats, and now what looks dangerously close to defamation. Under oath, I was shocked to discover that my name, or at least references to my reporting, were mentioned in filings and arguments by Blake Lively's lawyers. But instead of simply defending their client, it now appears that the legal team has taken it a step further by allegedly making false and damaging claims to the court. Their goal to paint anyone who challenges their narrative as untrustworthy, biased, or even malicious. But the real reason seems much more calculated. They want to shut down any dissent, bury independent investigations, and create a chilling effect on anyone who dares to speak critically of their client. This isn't about fame anymore. This isn't just Hollywood gossip. It's about power, control, and the weaponization of the legal system to silence legitimate criticism and deflect from questions that are increasingly difficult to ignore. How did we get here? Why are Blake Lively's lawyers allegedly resorting to this kind of strategy? And what does it say about the case as a whole? Over the next several parts, we're going to unpack every detail: what's happening in court, what the filings actually say, how creators are being swept into the controversy, and how this aggressive legal tactic is being seen as an alarming attempt to suppress transparency. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and prepare for one of the most intense deep dives we've done yet, because if you think this is just another celebrity case, you haven't seen what's happening behind the curtain. The moment I saw the document, my heart sank. At first glance, it looked like just another procedural motion in a long, messy court battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. But as I read deeper, I realized something wasn't right. My reporting referenced, vaguely but unmistakably, was being described in terms that were not just dismissive but inflammatory. Allegations of misinformation, reckless narrative building, and malicious public shaping were being woven into the argument. There was no mistaking it. The implication was clear: commentary like mine was dangerous, untrustworthy, and potentially libelous, except I hadn't lied. Every single point one had made had been based on publicly available court documents, statements from verified sources, and direct quotes from legal filings. And yet here I was being mentioned in the same breath as bad faith actors and individuals seeking to distort justice. This wasn't just unfair, it was chilling. Because if a lawyer for a major celebrity can casually characterize independent analysis as a threat to the integrity of the court, what's stopping others from doing the same? But let's rewind. For those who haven't been following closely, the legal dispute between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni stems from alleged behind-the-scenes conflicts related to the film adaptation of It Ends With Us. What began as a disagreement over casting and production decisions soon ballooned into a full-scale defamation suit, with both parties trading accusations. But here's the twist: as more documents became public, content creators, especially those doing legal commentary, began raising questions that the mainstream media avoided. That's when things started to change. Rather than engage with those questions or simply allow them to exist, Blake Lively's legal team allegedly decided to discredit them and their strategy to suggest that certain creators, without naming them directly, were creating obstructive noise and spreading unverified gossip that jeopardized the fairness of the proceedings. On paper, that might sound like a standard legal complaint about media influence. But once you connect the dots, a more troubling picture starts to emerge. For example, in one motion, the team claimed that online commentary was being weaponized against their client, an odd statement considering that much of the commentary they were referencing came after documents were made public. Another filing went even further, suggesting that certain digital narratives were encouraging harassment. Again, no names, no specific evidence, just enough ambiguity to cast doubt on everyone who dared to speak. And now the pattern is repeating, only more aggressively. Sources close to the situation say that in recent closed-door sessions, Lively's legal team specifically pointed to content creators with influence as contributors to what they described as a misguided public discourse. While they didn't name specific creators, those same sources say my work and others like mine was clearly being referenced. What makes this so disturbing isn't just the personal attack, it's the larger implication that the team is allegedly trying to frame legitimate commentary as dangerous or even defamatory in order to protect their client from further scrutiny. This, critics argue, is not how the legal system is supposed to function. Because here's the thing, legal proceedings are public for a reason. Court filings once submitted are fair game for analysis and discussion, and while no one should spread misinformation or make baseless accusations, there is a world of difference between commentary based on verified documents and malicious defamation. So when a team of elite attorneys starts pushing a narrative that conflates the two, people start asking questions. Is this really about protecting the client or about shutting down dissent? One particularly telling moment came during a status hearing, where the judge asked about media attention. Lively's attorney reportedly launched into a critique of viral misinformation and dangerous speculation. Again, no direct examples, no evidence, just vague allusions and the ever-present insinuation that if someone criticizes the narrative, they must be lying or worse, doing harm. But what about accountability? What about the basic idea that when powerful people go to court, the public has a right to know what's happening, that creators and journalists have a duty to dissect and explain these cases for wider understanding? What we're seeing, critics say, is the use of litigation as intimidation, not just toward the opposing party but toward anyone watching. And when lawyers start allegedly misrepresenting commentary to silence it, we're entering dangerous territory. I reached out to a legal analyst who has followed similar celebrity cases, and their take was blunt. This is a pressure campaign, plain and simple. The moment you start labeling critical commentary as harmful discourse, especially when that commentary is based on public documents, you've stopped defending your client and started playing a public relations game inside the courtroom, and that's what this increasingly feels like, a PR game dressed in legal robes. Whether intentional or not, the message being sent is loud and clear: speak out and you might be next. As the filings kept coming in and as courtroom discussions unfolded, one thing became clear: this was no longer just about legal arguments or contractual misunderstandings. It was now about controlling the narrative. And Blake Lively's legal team seemed absolutely determined to take that control by any means necessary, even if it meant stepping into ethically murky territory. The most striking part, their apparent effort to characterize independent commentary as not just problematic, but potentially defamatory, even when that commentary was firmly rooted in public record. Let's be honest, celebrity legal cases have always drawn attention. It's nothing new. But what is different now is the visibility and influence of independent commentators, legal analysts, and YouTubers who can now reach millions without going through traditional media filters. These creators are offering viewers breakdowns of court documents, timelines of events, legal interpretations, and broader cultural context. And that level of influence seems to be exactly what is making certain legal teams nervous, especially when their client is under intense public scrutiny. According to multiple legal experts, the real issue isn't that commentary exists, it's that it exists outside their control. And so rather than confront the information head-on or clarify misunderstandings, Blake Lively's attorneys seem to have chosen a different path, one that involves delegitimizing the very people talking about the case. They aren't arguing on the merits of the commentary, instead they're questioning the credibility of those speaking, without addressing the actual content of what's being said. For instance, in one court filing that has since raised eyebrows, Blake's lawyers claimed that unvetted digital media narratives were interfering with the dignity of these proceedings. That language is subtle but loaded. What exactly qualifies as unvetted? Is a YouTube breakdown of a court document unvetted if it doesn't agree with your side? Is commentary harmful simply because it reaches a large audience? These are subjective standards, and that's what makes this so dangerous. If you can't control the facts, discredit the people delivering them. That's the oldest trick in the PR playbook. But in a legal setting, especially in a high-profile case, that tactic takes on a much more troubling tone. What's especially alarming is that this effort to cast doubt on creators is happening inside the courtroom, where claims carry weight and consequences. When you imply without naming that certain individuals are spreading misinformation or even encouraging harassment, you're not just shaping opinion, you're potentially putting those individuals at risk. You're creating an official record that could be cited in future cases or even used as a pretext for subpoenas, takedown requests, or legal threats. And that's exactly what we're starting to see. Several creators have now come forward, some publicly, others behind the scenes, saying they've received threatening legal correspondence from attorneys linked to this case. The language is always careful. It never explicitly says you're being sued, but it strongly suggests that if they don't stop commenting, if they don't take down certain content, or if they don't correct misleading narratives, there could be legal consequences. It's all implied, but the message is loud and clear. Stay quiet or risk retaliation. This, according to digital rights groups, is an increasingly common tactic known as lawfare. It's when powerful individuals or institutions use the threat of legal action, not necessarily to win in court, but to intimidate, silence, or drain resources from those they perceive as opponents. And in this case, the targets aren't media, conglomerates, or political organizations. They're individuals, creators, commentators, people who work from home with a mic and a laptop, and who are now being dragged into a legal nightmare simply for doing their job. Let's look at a few examples. One YouTuber who had been covering the case from the beginning received a cease and desist letter after doing a 20-minute segment analyzing one of the early filings. The letter claimed that the video misrepresented facts, even though the creator had only read directly from the documents themselves and offered opinions clearly marked as such. Another creator known for covering celebrity legal news says they were approached by a third-party PR firm that advised them to tone down their coverage and avoid contributing to online misinformation. Again, no specifics, just pressure. The effect is undeniable. Creators start to pull back. They worry about lawsuits, takedowns, or losing their channels, and that's the point. Even if no case is ever filed, even if no judgment is ever made, the threat alone is enough to disrupt the flow of information. It's classic chilling effect wrapped in the language of legal responsibility. But here's the problem for Blake Lively's team: this strategy may be backfiring. Because the more people see these pressure tactics, the more it looks like a cover-up. The more vague threats are issued, the more viewers ask, what are they trying to hide? Instead of silencing critics, these tactics are amplifying them, and instead of controlling the narrative, they're creating a new one where a powerful legal team is allegedly using court proceedings not just to win a case, but to bully their way out of accountability. Even mainstream journalists are beginning to take note. In a recent piece for a prominent media outlet, a legal analyst pointed out the increasingly aggressive posturing by Lively's attorneys and warned that it could lead to greater scrutiny, not less. The article cited multiple examples of commentary being labeled harmful without any clear reasoning or citations, and questioned whether such tactics were ethical or even legal. And that leads us to another crucial question: what happens if these tactics continue? What if the court begins to entertain these complaints about damaging commentary? What if judges begin issuing warnings or even rulings based on how content is being interpreted rather than what it actually says? This is the slippery slope we're facing. Because if a legal team can get away with broadly labeling any dissent as harmful or defamatory without proof, and if courts begin to accept that framing without scrutiny, then we're entering a new era of legal control over speech. And not just for creators, but for anyone trying to talk honestly about powerful people. And for many of us who value open discussion, transparency, and accountability, that is deeply alarming. The court system was never meant to be used as a blunt weapon against speech. It was designed to uphold justice, not suppress inquiry. And so the real question now is not just what Blake Lively's legal team is doing, but what we allow them to do. Will judges push back on vague claims and demand specifics? Will creators stand together and refuse to be silenced? Will viewers recognize when they're being manipulated? Because at this point, this isn't just about one celebrity case, it's about a much larger battle over who gets to speak, who gets to question, and who gets to tell the story. And based on everything we've seen so far, that story is far from over. Reveals the psychological warfare happening in real time. Because make no mistake, what's being deployed here isn't just legal maneuvering, it's a calculated use of language, framing, and public perception to distort the narrative both inside and outside the courtroom. Let's talk about language. In most high-stakes legal battles, what lawyers say and how they say it is scrutinized with surgical precision. Every phrase in a filing, every comment made in court, every quote that leaks to the media is deliberate. And in this case, Blake Lively's legal team has proven itself remarkably skilled at walking the line between implication and accusation. Take one recent filing, for example. It described certain online narratives surrounding the case as highly suggestive, broadly misleading, and potentially inflammatory. On its surface, that sounds like a standard objection to online speculation. But buried in that vague phrasing is a very pointed message that the people discussing this case, myself included, are a problem. Not because of what we've said, but because we exist outside the team's narrative control. They don't name us, but they don't have to. That's the brilliance and the danger of how this is being done. It's legal theater designed to influence the judge-shaped media reaction and plant doubt in the minds of the public. And what makes this particularly disturbing is that it's working for now. I've already seen creators dial back their commentary. I've spoken to journalists who admit they're treading lightly, afraid of receiving legal threats or being shut out of future court proceedings. The fear is real, the intimidation is real. And if you're not paying attention, it's easy to miss how this web is being spun, because it doesn't rely on direct confrontation. It relies on implied authority and manufactured legitimacy. But the more you analyze these documents, the more obvious the manipulation becomes. For instance, the term unsubstantiated claims appears several times in the latest filing, but never with citations, never with specific examples. Why? Because that would require the team to acknowledge the actual statements being made, and that might expose the truth behind those statements. Let's be absolutely clear, much of the coverage that's being attacked here is based directly on Blake Lively's own public filings. When I referenced the timeline inconsistencies in the production process, or noted discrepancies in deposition transcripts, I wasn't speculating. I was quoting the documents word for word. So when her attorneys say the commentary is damaging, the real question becomes damaging to whom? Not to the case itself, not to justice, but to their narrative, a narrative built on selective framing, vague rebuttals, and constant efforts to muddy the waters. But here's the twist, it's starting to unravel. Over the last few weeks, something has shifted. Maybe it's because of the public's increasing skepticism. Maybe it's because more people are finally reading these court documents for themselves. Or maybe it's just because the tactics have become too aggressive to ignore. Whatever the reason, support for the legal team's strategy is waning and fast. Several prominent legal analysts, including those with no dog in this fight, have begun to question the ethics of what's happening. In a viral op-ed that circulated last week, a former federal clerk wrote, "It is not the role of a defense attorney to micromanage public perception by suppressing commentary. If a narrative is false, refute it. If it's true, own it. But to imply criminality without offering evidence is a betrayal of legal integrity." And that's the key here. They aren't refuting, they're implying. They're not offering direct counters to what content creators are saying. They're just suggesting that the entire realm of independent commentary is dangerous. It's a sweeping generalization with no foundation, but it's repeated often enough that it begins to sound plausible to outsiders. And once that seed of doubt is planted, it grows, especially in a courtroom, where perception matters just as much as facts. It's not just legal experts who are pushing back now. Digital rights organizations are taking notice too. A representative from one of the most respected media freedom groups told me under condition of anonymity, this case is starting to resemble a digital slap strategic lawsuit against public participation. These aren't formal lawsuits, but the tactics are designed to silence people through intimidation and legal fog. And when you look at the full picture, it's hard to argue with that assessment. We're seeing vague public filings targeting unnamed critics, private pressure on creators to retract content, legal threats that never go to court but create real fear, attempts to control public conversation using legal privilege. All of it plays into a dangerous precedent, one where truth takes a backseat to control. But perhaps the biggest shift we're seeing now is from the community itself: viewers, subscribers, fans, people who watch content because they trust creators to break down what the mainstream media ignores. These are the people who are now speaking out in defense of creators. They're not buying the narrative that commentary equals misinformation. They're not convinced that questioning a public figure's behavior is inherently defamatory, and they're making their voices heard. Comments are pouring in saying things like, "Funny how they want transparency, but only when it works for them. You read the same documents we did. How is that misinformation? This feels like a cover-up." Plain and simple. These aren't trolls or conspiracy theorists. These are regular people who've been watching closely, and they can see exactly what's going on. Which raises the final question for this part of our deep dive: what now? If the legal team continues down this path, they risk doing more harm than good. Every veiled threat, every vague accusation, every attempt to shift blame onto commentators only reinforces the idea that there's something they don't want us to see. And in an age where everything is documented, archived, and dissected online, that's a battle they're not likely to win. What they're doing may seem powerful now, but in the long run, this strategy risks eroding the very credibility they're so desperate to protect. Because if truth is really on their side, why are they so afraid of people talking about it? As we reach the end of this in-depth look at Blake Lively's legal team's alleged tactics, the broader picture has come into sharp focus, and it's deeply unsettling. What started as a legal dispute between two celebrities has morphed into a high-stakes battle over free speech accountability and the ethical limits of courtroom influence. This case is no longer just about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, it's about the power of narrative and, more importantly, the power to silence it. We've seen how the language used by Blake Lively's legal representatives, though carefully crafted, appears to be increasingly weaponized not just to argue on behalf of their client, but to delegitimize and discredit anyone speaking critically about the case. From vague references to harmful online narratives to implied accusations of misinformation, to alleged pressure behind the scenes against content creators, it's all part of what now looks like a very deliberate strategy. Shut down the voices that challenge the story they want told. But here's the truth, this strategy isn't going unnoticed. If anything, it's backfiring. Viewers, journalists, legal analysts, and rights advocates are waking up to the pattern. They're not just seeing individual filings or isolated statements. They're seeing the bigger strategy unfold, and they're pushing back. Because when you try to control a public narrative using legal power, it raises questions that are impossible to ignore. Why suppress commentary if there's nothing to hide? Why issue vague legal threats instead of addressing claims directly? Why create an atmosphere of fear when truth should speak for itself? This entire ordeal underscores something much deeper and more troubling. We are witnessing a test case for how far legal teams representing powerful public figures can go in using the judicial system not just to argue their side, but to intimidate critics and erase opposing voices. It's a test case for how celebrity privilege intersects with legal aggression. And most concerning of all, it's a test of whether truth-tellers can be silenced not with facts, but with filings. Let's be very clear, no one is above critique. And certainly no one is above accountability, not even someone as famous, admired, or influential as Blake Lively. The legal system exists to uphold justice, not protect reputations at the expense of transparency. What we're seeing here, if the allegations about these tactics are true, is a chilling misuse of power, a misuse that could set a dangerous precedent for any content creator, journalist, or everyday person who dares to speak out on matters of public concern. Imagine a world where all commentary must be approved by PR teams. Imagine if every video, article, or podcast questioning a celebrity's behavior was treated as a legal liability regardless of whether it was fact-based. That's not just dystopian, it's un-American, and it's not how the court of public opinion or actual courts are supposed to work. This is why it matters that we push back. This is why it's essential to continue asking tough questions, referencing public documents, and refusing to be bullied into silence. Because the moment we let a few vague legal phrases discredit real analysis, we open the door for widespread censorship by intimidation. The truth is, the legal system isn't perfect. Judges can be influenced, language can be twisted, and public perception can be shaped by fear as easily as by facts. But none of that means we have to accept it. It is precisely because these systems are imperfect that voices outside the courtroom are so necessary. Voices like yours, voices like mine. This is not about gossip. This is not about clicks or views. This is about accountability, ethics, and the right to ask questions, especially when those questions point to contradictions, evasions, or potential wrongdoing by people in positions of power. What Blake Lively's legal team may not have anticipated is that creators are no longer just observers. We are analysts, educators, investigators, and in many cases defenders of truth. We read the documents, we examine the facts, we highlight inconsistencies. We challenge narratives not because we have an agenda, but because the public deserves to know when something doesn't add up. The irony here is that in trying to control the conversation, they've only amplified it. The very effort to intimidate and silence has instead sparked a much larger conversation, one that now includes legal ethics, freedom of speech, and the weaponization of reputation management inside the courtroom. And in doing so, they've exposed the very behavior they were trying to hide. Of course, there's still more to come. The court proceedings are ongoing, more filings will emerge, more subpoenas may be issued, and more creators may come forward with their own stories of intimidation or legal threats. But let this conclusion serve as a firm line in the sand: we will not be silent. If lawyers can enter a courtroom and casually suggest that public discussion is dangerous, then it becomes our duty to prove that truth is more powerful than fear. If they can frame commentary as defamatory without proving it, then we must continue to speak with clarity, integrity, and courage. If they try to paint transparency as harmful, we must double down on making facts accessible. Because ultimately, this isn't just about one case. It's about whether public participation in justice remains possible in the face of legal intimidation. It's about whether content creators can remain part of the truth-telling ecosystem without being targeted. And it's about whether justice can survive when criticism becomes a liability. So to every viewer who's been following this story, to every creator facing legal pushback, And to every journalist trying to speak honestly, do not back down. Do not let fear decide what stories are told. Do not let vague threats erase hard facts. The more they try to suppress this conversation, the louder and more precise we must become. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about what Blake Lively's lawyer said. It's about what they tried to make us believe and what we chose to say anyway. We stand not just for commentary but for truth. And truth doesn't get silenced. Not here, not now, not ever.